Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Priscilla Charles, and I'm joined today at the Think Global Awards live by Beatrice Whelan from Sage. Hi Beatrice, thank you so much for being here today, we really appreciate it.
Hi Priscilla, thank you very much for having me.
Our pleasure. So Beatrice is the Senior Manager for Sage Advice and Content Platforms, and for now we'll just get on to the show. So Beatrice, I'd like you to start telling us a little bit about your background, please.
Yeah, so, well, how far back will I go? I started my marketing career in Google. Gosh, it seems like a long time ago now, back in 2002, I believe it was.
Wow.
So that gave me, great exposure, I suppose, early on in my career to the different opportunities in digital marketing. Worked for them in paid search, in their paid search team. And then I moved on and I worked as a website designer for about 6 years in a company based in Kildare.
Okay.
And that was really interesting for me because it gave me an opportunity, I suppose, to be more creative, with my digital marketing skills and do some web design, but also learn more about, front end coding and so on. And from there, started to really get interested in search engine optimization. Obviously to help the websites I was designing rank on Google. Mm-hmm. And then from there, my interest really developed into content and blogging, right? Because it became really apparent very quickly that the best way to rank your website on Google was to give people the content that they were looking for, right?
Okay.
And, give them the answers to the questions that they were looking for. And content and blogging is a great way to do that. So that's how I kind of transitioned from, search engine marketing really into content and blogging and social media from there.
Fantastic, thanks very much. And it's an interesting journey though, considering the fact that you actually started studying history of art and architecture.
Yes.
And then you studied on PR and digital journalism and then multimedia system with a master's degree at Trinity College. Yeah. So why kind of moving towards, digital?
Well, I think I started when I did my arts degree, I was very young when I started in university. I was 17 years of age. And I think at that age, I probably wasn't sure what I wanted to do, right? But I knew that I loved being creative and I loved history of art and the humanities, and decided that would give me a really good foundation, to learn and improve my skills while I kind of went on the journey of discovering what it is that I wanted to spend my life doing. Yeah. So, and I think, I was really lucky. The 4 years I spent in Trinity, were definitely, some of the best years ever. And the humanities give a really good foundation actually for marketing careers because you learn how to research and you learn how to write and you learn how to communicate and you also learn how to be creative as well. And so I didn't realize it at the time, but it was giving me a really good foundation for communications and marketing. And then towards the end of my degree, I started to become aware of how what we called information communication technology, that's what we called it back then, but how that was being used to help people, manage collections in museums, share those collections with the wider public through, digitization and websites and so on. And I became really interested in how technology was being used to help people learn and discover, art collections and so on. And so when I came to the end of my degree, it seemed like a really good transition then to study the Masters in Multimedia. And what was interesting about that Masters to me was that it was designed especially for people who didn't have a digital background. So it was designed for people who didn't have a degree in computer science, people who were coming from, a backgrounds like mine, to kind of upskill us and to give us those technical skills that we would need to then go out and, function in the workplace. So, yeah.
That seemed to be perfect degree.
Yeah, it was a good experience. So very happy that I came from that position. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And now you're currently responsible for the global content and the Sage Advice and Content Platforms at Sage.com. Can you tell us a little bit about your role and the company itself?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, there's a lot to tell. So, first of all, Sage are a business technology company, and we sell cloud software that helps businesses manage their finances and helps businesses manage their people. So very much a B2B context software company. But as part of that, engagement with our customers and our prospects, we also want to help them, provide them with the advice to manage their business, right? And so it seems like the perfect fit for us to launch a blog called Sage Advice, which would give people advice on everything from managing their money to their people. And it provides a really, strong vehicle for Sage to engage with our customers at a very early stage, in their discovery of who we are and what we provide. So Sage Advice is very much, from a marketing perspective, very much a top of funnel engagement piece. It's a blog and a content hub where we allow people to discover the answers to the questions that they have. So a really important project for us.
Yes, I can imagine, yes. And so I understand that the platform is currently live in 6 markets, right?
Yes, 6 at the moment. We're live in the UK, US, Ireland, France, Spain and Germany as well.
Wow.
And currently, in build to go live in many more over the next few months. So a really big project and so interesting to work on to get that exposure to all of those different markets and their specific needs as well. I can
imagine, yes. And talking about specific needs in different markets, there is another platform called Sage Authors. That's another really example of what you've been working on Sage.
Yeah.
You commented that it's important for local authors to identify local markets.
Yes.
So can you expand a little bit on this? Like, how do you work with people in an international context? Like when it comes, to themes or messages that are unique in like similar or various countries, really?
Yeah, it's a massive challenge, and it's key to getting it right. So that Sage Advice delivers, for those customers and prospects in that market and delivers for Sage in each market too. So what we have is, a global content strategy that in a very broad sense guides each of the markets that we work with on what they should be publishing about on Sage Advice, right? So again, it's like I mentioned, giving advice on everything from managing your money to people. But then that's very broad, right? And then in the market, they need to develop more specific content calendars and so on. And so what they then do is within that broader strategy, they look at what specific topics people are searching for in their market. And that's really where data and looking at, keywords for organic search and what the search volume is for different keywords becomes really, really important. And I think, we're lucky and we're fortunate to be supported by a really strong SEO team in Sage who are able to supply us with that organic, search data, and then working with those individual markets to share that data with them to ensure that we're supporting them to be planning their content around the specific themes that are really important for their market. And then back to your question on authors, it's about then supporting those markets to I suppose recruit authors in those local markets who are recognized experts on those topics. And that's really important because you don't trust the advice that somebody gives you unless you believe that they're an expert in that area. And so that's why, we say that Sage Advice is wisdom for businesses. Well, it's only wisdom if it comes from somebody with years of experience, right?
Makes sense, yeah.
So that's why, developing our author program in those different markets is really, really important for the success of Sage Advice.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. And another example of how Sage helps companies to get to know their customers better is Zing, a social sharing channel that was added, right, to Sage Advice Germany for the German market,
Yeah, that was so interesting to me because, I suppose in Ireland, I don't use Zing, right? But, speaking to my colleagues in Germany, they explained to me that it's such an important social media platform for them. And so we have, social sharing buttons on our blog posts and, they explained that we just had to add Zing because it was so popular in Germany. And I think that's an example of where localization, you know, not just in the content, but actually in the development of the publishing platform is really, really important. And, you know, listening to, you know, me listening to my colleagues in Germany and taking on board their input and their advice as well as we built out the Sage Advice platform. So, yeah, that was an interesting one.
Yeah, obviously that doesn't, the local advice or the local, what the local want is obviously slightly different, and they only know best, I suppose.
Yeah.
So now I'd like to talk about the Think Global Forum technology. You're a forum executive.
Yes.
And you've been at the forum and last year delivered a speech where Sage Advice has contributed to Sage being recognized as one of the top 50 content marketing brands in the world, and also one of the top 8 content marketing brands in the sector. But you're also involved in many other activities. You're a regular guest speaker at events, you provide webinars, you've been published in the Huffington Post, the Irish Tatler, and also you're the author of a book called Trending, the Complete Guide to Social Media for Events, published 3 years ago. So can you tell us a little bit about the book? I'm curious.
Yeah,
it's a very catchy name.
Yeah, so I wrote the book, you know, for myself, really. You know, it was really, I suppose, a selfish initiative in the sense that it was the book that I would have wanted to read, right? So a few years ago, I was working in the social media side of the social and content team in Sage. And a lot of the internal requests that I was getting was to support, you know, our events team in the promotion of their events, like Sage Summit, like the Sage presence at other conferences like Dreamforce and so on, you know, and how we could use social media to do that, right? And it's a really interesting topic to me, but something that at the time I couldn't find a lot of information on. So as I worked on those projects and learned more, you know, I used a book to kind of document that experience, you know, so that it would be something that would hopefully be useful, you know, to other people who were going through the same journey. And, you know, I suppose while writing the book, I, you know, was able to research more as well and learn more too. So it was also a great learning experience, and interviewed a lot of different people who are experts, right? Because I am by no means an expert, continue to learn every day, and so it was great to get the opportunity to speak to other people who have expertise on that topic as well.
That sounds fantastic, yeah. I read excellent reviews, people saying that it was really useful to them, so yeah. And you also wrote an article for VTQ magazine about social media strategy for event marketing that is really important, obviously. So you touched on the topics of strategy, research, social listening, and choosing the right channels. So we're in a world that's predominantly dominated by social media, the good, the bad, the ugly. We see it every day. How important are social media strategy for brands today, marketers? I mean, it is just kind of predominant and essential.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think, you know, as much as some days we might feel like we want to ignore social media, you know, you just can't ignore it, right? And I think for, you know, no business can bury their head in the sand and pretend that those channels don't exist. Absolutely. You know, it's now a mass medium, and in the same way that print and radio and television have been so important in the past and continue to be important, social media is now just as important. You know, it's this mass medium, and, you know, in terms of going where your customers are, if that's where they are, you do need to follow. I think that what's different now is that I think businesses are starting to become a lot more sophisticated with their social media plans, and, you know, rather than trying to do everything, are being a lot smarter and being a lot more selective and picking the channels and the opportunities that allows them to best serve their customers and prospects, right? So I think that that's something that's really interesting, and that's why a strategy is really important, because it defines what you will and won't do, right? So I think it's really good for giving people in the organisation the guidance that they need on what they need to focus on. And I think now, because social media has become such an integral part of everybody's lives, it's not just marketing anymore, it's the whole business, right? So it's customer service and really any way that the business engages with their customers and prospects, you know, there's an opportunity to do that on social media.
Absolutely.
And so that's why, you know, having a plan, having a strategy is so important.
It's essential, yeah, absolutely. And you've always had an affinity, obviously, for digital media communication and the arts. And speaking of trends, can you tell us, have you noticed any trends, the latest trend that caught your eye, or that maybe, the one trends in a couple of years' time?
I think it's a really interesting time right now because I think there's a lot of change happening. Mm-hmm. I kind of feel we're at a bit of a turning point, you know, where social is concerned. And I spoke at a conference back in November, and I talked about how really for many of the channels we are what is called peak social, right? Where the growth of people on those channels is starting to level out, right? So Facebook and Twitter and probably LinkedIn as well are starting to see, you know, the acceleration in growth that they had on those channels starting to flatten out a bit. Mm-hmm. And I think people are becoming a little bit fatigued with social media. And I think, people are becoming weary of some of the negatives of social media as well. And so I'm starting to see a shift, a turn away towards more private social media experiences, towards more enriched and meaningful social media experiences, because I think up until now, it's been very much, you know, kind of the sugar rush, right, of social, you know, the quick hit, the dopamine hit. Whereas I think, you know, what I'm starting to see a trend of is a move away from that and a search for actually more meaning to nurture people on social instead of giving them the sugar rush. I think it's going to mean more private social media spaces. And I think Mark Zuckerberg knows this, right? And that's why his announcement, you know, only last week about Facebook having a privacy strategy, right? Because he knows that the news feed and the current way things are not going to last for very much longer. So
trends are changing.
So lots of change happening in that area right now.
Great, thanks very much. Finally, are there any projects on the horizon that you'd like to talk about, to tell our audience today? Any secret project you'd like to share, preview?
Just to say, you know, keep watching Sage Advice. You know, as I said, we are going live in many more markets this year, and there's lots of new developments happening as well. So we're starting to build out the Sage Advice podcast. It's now a very popular podcast for the business community in the US right now, but also looking at developing that for some of the other markets that Sage Advice is live in, and also integrating that into the Sage Advice blog, right? So so that the information is available to people in lots of different formats as well, which I see you're also doing in VistaTalks. So I think podcasting is something that we're all very interested in right now.
I think podcasts are definitely trending at the moment.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, Luke, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. It was great to have you on the show today. And this is the end of today's show with Beatrice Whelan from Sage. Thanks to everyone who tuned in and watched the show from the Think Global Awards live today in Dublin. And please make sure to tune in again for more VistaTalks, where we'll be back in more interesting discussion with interesting people from all around the world.